last night in comparison to Archbishop Babakala, but I thought it might be good politics to hold this in my hands and reach up to his level. Brothers and sisters, we have been greatly encouraged. I can speak for myself with what we heard of the East African revival last night, and also with the wonderful worship that we've had this morning. We praise God for that. And it is with that encouragement of Jesus Christ at the center and of the spiritual renewal into which God is leading us. It is with that in mind that we now come to some of the problems that we are facing in our world and indeed in our church. We cannot deny them, we cannot turn away from them, we cannot ignore them any longer. And so we intend to tackle them head on this morning with the help of our two distinguished speakers, whom I will introduce in a moment. But the three issues that we can tackle during the course of this conference, if not this morning, are of course aggressive secularism. Aggressive secularism which infects so much of the Western world, but which is also now having a creeping and increasing influence in other parts of the world. We must recognize that wherever we are. Secondly, radical Islamism. How that is destroying societies, limiting freedom, and posing a danger for so many of the nations from which we come. And thirdly, of course, the danger of syncretism, of believing that what people think about the world and God and themselves, that all of it is really the same, and that Christian faith has nothing unique to offer. I mean, these are the dangers that we need to address in the course of this conference, as well, of course, as many of the opportunities. Now, just to introduce the theme very briefly, more and more research is showing us that the spiritual dimension is innate in people. In Africa, we don't need to say this, but sometimes in the West we do. But even in the West, even people who don't go to church, especially children, research is finding that they have innately, within them, God-given, the possibility of recognizing something that is beyond the spiritual dimension. And of course, we all know how the spiritual dimension is used by people to give direction to their lives, to find purpose in it, and so forth. But I think what we will be looking at, particularly this morning, is not just the personal aspect of the spiritual, but the social aspect. How is that dimension of human existence expressed socially? And of course, the traditional word for that has been religion. Religion means the social dimension of the spiritual. In the West, religion has, by conspiracy, the word religion has been made a bad word. Everybody wants to be spiritual, nobody wants to be religious. But that means individualism and excessive individualism. We must look at the social dimension of the spiritual. Our speakers will undoubtedly do so this morning. In past ages, every culture, every society, every moment in history has found that religion in one way or another, for good or for bad, has provided for these cultures the values, the customs, the laws, everything that is precious to them. But Western sociologists have been describing how this aspect of the spiritual has been declining. Our speakers will tell you why this is so, but the description certainly rings true if we look at Western society and other societies being influenced by the Western world. Brian Wilson, the father of the British School of Sociology, tells us that there are two reasons for the decline of religion in the West. One is that democracy now, according to him, provides the moral legitimation that religion once did. So you can count heads and you can decide what is right or wrong. We, of course, would not agree with that, but that is how it is being done today. Policy is being made by opinion poll. Secondly, it is the welfare state. So what the churches provided for people in terms of their material, spiritual, psychological need is now allegedly being met by the welfare state. Well, I think Wilson has gone too far, because democracy cannot justify everything and the welfare state cannot meet all needs. In Britain, certainly, and this will be true of many parts of the world, the nation was formed by the gospel. You know, we need to give thanks to God for that, whatever the challenges today. The idea of the nation, the forming of the nation, the laws around which the nation cohered, the idea of the godly ruler who is himself or herself subject to law, the influence of the Ten Commandments, the idea of a godly society of mutual interdependence, but also the recognition of individual worth. All of these were formed by the gospel, and the process of secularization, as you will hear, is throwing away this precious heritage. So it is concentrating more and more on how things work. Well, that's good. I mean, we wouldn't be here if we didn't know how things work. Technology, in other words. It is concentrating on what things there are in the world. More and more documentaries on the natural world by David Attenborough and others. Nothing wrong with that. But it is not asking the question, why? Why is there anything rather than nothing? Why am I here? What am I doing here? And it's not therefore asking the what for question. What is the purpose of the universe? What is the purpose of our lives? And where are we all going? The idea of destiny is ignored. Aggressive secularism likes to uphold certain values like human dignity, equality, and freedom, liberty, but it doesn't know why these values should be important. Because in the end, they are, of course, rooted in the Christian vision of the world and of the human person. Human dignity, which cannot be taken away from human beings, of course, rooted in the biblical idea of all of us without exception, being made in God's image. Equality on the Bible's teaching of the common origin of all human beings. Common origin. And freedom, of course, is inherent in the gospel itself, because the gospel can make its demand only to those who can freely respond to it. Now, aggressive secularism has distorted this. So human dignity has become radical autonomy, as Dr. Rovi will tell us in a moment. It is the letter I, as we heard from Dr. Signoni last night, rather than the letter C. Not buying to anybody or anything or anywhere. Equality has become not the equality of persons, because they are made in God's image, but the equality of any and every lifestyle, behavior, way of life, relationship. And similarly, liberty has just become permissiveness. Our speakers will tackle all of these issues. What I do want to say, just before they begin to speak, is that aggressive secularism, at least in the Western world, has created a vacuum in the public space. The space that was once occupied by gospel values is now empty. And the question is, what will fill the vacuum? Nature abhors a vacuum, as you know. And one of the dangers is that this new comprehensive economic, social, and political ideology of Islamism may fill the vacuum. Thirdly, there is a kind of falsehood around that all religions lead to the same truths, to the same values. Brothers and sisters, this is not the case.
Thank you.
The values that we have of dignity, of freedom, of equality have been produced by the gospel, by the Bible's vision of the world and of ourselves. Of course, we must talk to people of other faiths and of none about common values, but we should be clear from where we have got our truth and our values. Our speakers will lead us into this. May I first introduce then the Reverend Dr. Mike Ovey, who is the principal of Oak Hill Theological College in London, and he is speaking about grace, the grace of God, both in the church, but also how the world resists God's grace, and in its place, in place of true grace, actually proposes a false and a cheap grace. So please welcome Dr. Michael Ovey.